For the first time since 2020, the Seahawks are NFC West champs. How did Mike Macdonald's squad get it done in the toughest division in the NFL? We're going to be revisiting a historic Seahawks season here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang, and a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support of the podcast, whether you are listening in from Pullman, Washington, or down in Pensacola, Florida. Thanks again for making Locked On Podcast Network the number one sports podcast network. The Seahawks are NFC West champs. They get to bask in that for a little bit longer here before they start to gear up for the divisional round, as they don't have a playoff game this weekend. They get one of the two coveted byes. We're going to be revisiting how the West was won by Mike Macdonald's squad. And then we've got all pro teams. Rob, you and I always love to dish out our offense, defense, and special teams, the best of the best. How many Seahawks made it on our respective lists, and who else made the elite teams for 2025? All that coming your way courtesy of our friends over at FanDuel. The wild card round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It felt like it had been quite some time since the Seahawks were atop the NFC West, 6 years to be exact. That drought is finally over, though, with the Seahawks capturing the NFC West crown in Saturday's win over the 49ers in Santa Clara. And Rob, in many ways, this has been a historic, at least regular season for the Seahawks. More wins than they've ever had before, with a 14-3 record, obviously helped by having that extra game, but still, they've had a couple times they finished with 13 wins. It's the first time they'd ever gotten to 14 wins. Number one ranked scoring defense, one of the best special teams units out there. Oh, by the way, Mike Macdonald with 16 road wins in his first two seasons as well. Just flat out ridiculous numbers. A historic 2025 season that the Seahawks hope still has a lot left for them to achieve with the playoffs coming up. So the big question is, how was the West won? You know, sometimes this is a pretty easy question. You know, I'm thinking about the Seahawks. I believe it was the 2007 season where everyone else in the NFC West stunk and they still won the division. They were a good but not great team. You know, that year say, well, you know what? They had a winning record. That's why they won the NFC West. This year, though, you had a 12-win team in San Francisco, a 13-win team in Los Angeles, and the Seahawks were in that same division and got to 14-3. So it feels like there's a lot more to unpack when you look at this season back holistically and how the Seahawks were able to beat out those two other teams in the toughest division in the NFL.
Yeah, I think that's very well said, Corbin, because you go back all the way back to the beginning of the Pete Carroll, John Schneider era here in Seattle. And I think that Pete Carroll basically had, a little bit of an advantage because, of course, he had been recruiting a lot of these players during his national championship run at USC, and he had some exotic ideas that very few in the NFL were ready to combat. When he was, prioritizing cornerbacks that had the 32+ inch arms and these pass rushers who are 245, 250 pounds, like a Bruce Irvin, for example, that some teams had in the third round. Seattle took him, I think it was 15th overall. It just was a very different way of doing business. Whereas with Mike Macdonald, he kind of went a little bit more of an organic route. Kind of working his way up through the coaching ranks. And so I think that the biggest thing I would say as far as why the West was won is just a change in physicality. I thought that the Seattle was number 3 in physicality in the NFC West at this date a year ago. I thought that clearly the Los Angeles Rams, the San Francisco 49ers, were more physical than the Seahawks were. And how that John Schneider and certainly Mike Macdonald and his staff were able to kind of completely switch that, I think that is a testament to the scouts. I think it's a testament to the coaches, obviously a testament to the players. But to me, that is the number one thing I would say is the physicality of the squad here in Seattle is now, I would argue, the most physical team in all of the NFL. And that is the biggest reason why Seattle is the number one seed in the divisional winners.
Yeah, I think it's not just physicality. I think that it is the locker room connection. It is the chemistry. And not that last year that this team didn't have good chemistry. I think we talked about it late last year when they were trying to get into the postseason, that this was a pretty tight-knit group, but they took it to another level this year. And the players that they brought in, that is always such a key ingredient in the offseason. You know, you can bring in all the talent in the world, but you have to also consider locker room chemistry. And that's where the pre-draft interviews and talking with agents and knowing what makes certain free agents tick. You know, the Seahawks had a high viewpoint on Sam Darnold because John Schneider loved him coming out of USC. And Sam Darnold always has had the right team first mentality. DeMarcus Lawrence has always been that guy that Dallas players look to. Nick Eamon-Warry, I know there was some stuff coming out of South Carolina pre-draft, but everybody I talked to at the university that's involved in their football program talked about how great of a teammate he was. He's been a great fit. Gray Zabel, you know, the way that he has come in and really stepped up and grown into a leader early in his career. I think that chemistry, the fact they had 95+% show-up ratings for their OTAs, the participation ratings were through the roof like I had never seen covering this team. That stuff matters. And it wasn't necessarily that they were getting the practice reps. It was that they were building that connection. And this is a very special, tight-knit group. You see that with the pass rush and the secondary, with the marriage that they've got with those two areas being synced up on offense. I think the O-line has played a lot better this year, not just because they're more physical, but because that group is a cohesive group. And now they get to keep a lot of these guys together for multiple seasons. So I think that, you know, everybody's going to look at the numbers. They're going to look at all the different players that had career years, the young talent. Those are all factors. But like getting that melding pot of veterans and youngsters that has been able to gel the way that they have, I think that is ultimately what carried them to the division title over two other very good football teams.
That's the thing. It's like they were kind of, you know, forged by iron, so to speak. I mean, like, my goodness, this wasn't the worst division in football the way it was when Seattle kind of got got a little bit of a run, you know, a decade ago. I mean, this is the best division of football. I mean, the statistics say it, the tape says it. We talked about this before, you know, but I think that one of the things that you said a moment ago about, you know, the Clint Kubiak and Adam Durde and the free agents that Seattle brought in. I mean, think about just the familiarity that Clint Kubiak had, having already worked with Sam Darnold, and he is going to be pushing for Darnold to bring him in. Adam Durde had previously working with the Dallas Cowboys, and I'm sure having a strong voice in the conversations about when Seattle shifted from Will Fries. I mean, imagine the conversation we were having if Seattle had brought in Will Fries at guard rather than DeMarcus Lawrence, who has been one of the best players for the Seahawks, no question about it, so far throughout the season. So again, I think that the familiarity with some of the free agents, rather than the familiarity with some of the rookie prospects, as I mentioned before, with Pete Carroll, and just when he was initially recruiting these young men out of high school. I think that is something that is right there in John Schneider's wheelhouse. To me, he has always been one of the best scouts, one of the best just talent evaluators in all of the NFL. And I think that we saw that kind of marriage between the scouting department and the coaching department that worked the first time the Seahawks won a Super Bowl. I think it's working in a different way here, not necessarily so much as far as the college evaluation, and certainly the Seahawks drafting has been spectacular. But I think that the free agent additions, again, specifically Sam Darnold, specifically DeMarcus Lawrence. Obviously, Cooper Kupp has played a significant role as well. But to me, DeMarcus Lawrence and Sam Darnold, what they have been able to provide the Seahawks at two key positions, I think, and the familiarity with the coaching staff that was already in place has absolutely played a huge role in Seattle's success.
It also doesn't hurt to have a QB receiver tandem that goes for over 1,700 yards and 10 touchdowns. I think it'd be remiss not to mention the JSN and Sam Darnold connection and the fact this is a number one scoring defense and the highest DVOA in Seahawks defensive history, including over 2013 and 2014. So there's some of those numbers for you that helped get over the edge as the NFC West champion, but certainly the on-field chemistry and the physicality, those have been massive things in all three phases for the Seahawks, getting to 14 wins and that number one seed. When we come back, as Rob and I love to do, and this year we have a built-in time to dive into it with the Seahawks being on a bye, who made our all-pro teams? We're going to start on the offensive side of the football, so QBs, running backs, receivers, and of course, the buffet bashers on the offensive line. We'll get to that up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at ZocDoc. Using ZocDoc makes scheduling easier. Search for in-network doctors and book right in the app. Real appointment times are listed, including same-day visits. No more back and forth phone calls or waiting weeks to be seen. It's super helpful. Routine checkups and those little issues you've been meaning to get checked out. I've used it to schedule appointments quickly when I didn't want to wait weeks. It helps you stay on top of your health before something becomes a bigger problem. So stop putting your doctor's appointments off and get the care you need. Go to ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL to find and instantly book a top-rated doctor today. That's ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. ZocDoc.com/LockedOnNFL. Hey guys, the draft pick positions have been set and so many teams are looking for their franchise QB. Ever wish to become a pro quarterback? Getting drafted first overall by the Raiders? Now you can. There's a mobile game just for you called Ultimate QB Football Legend. In this game, you step into the cleats of the number one draft pick QB, and it's your job to lead the team to greatness and help turn a failing franchise into a dynasty. This is the number one QB career game mode on the mobile app store, and it introduces the most realistic environment with full career control. You get to sign contracts, train and upgrade yourself, build chemistry and evolve with your teammates, give input to your GM on roster moves, play the actual games in 2D, and rise through the ranks to become a pro football legend. You'll deal with the ups and downs of a QB career, from rookie nerves to playoff drama, and every choice shapes your journey. Ultimate QB is totally free to play with no ads and works 100% offline. Perfect for when you want to sneak in a quick game or two on the go. Just head on over to ultimate-qb.com. That's ultimate-qb.com, or search the Ultimate QB app in the App Store. And we've got something special just for you. Use the promo code Locked On, all caps, in the game store to get a free boost at the start of your career. Ultimate QB, football legend QB1. It's your legacy. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in. And thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. You already live your team every day. Now take it up a level and go ad-free by joining the Everydayer Club today and getting Locked On Seahawks with no interruptions, members-only Discord access, and more, all for just $5 a month or $50 a year. Go to LockedOnSeahawks.supercast.com. or check the link in the show notes to learn more. We are now done with the regular season in the NFL. Wildcard weekend coming up, and the Seahawks don't play this weekend, and it's not because they missed the playoffs. A bye, the number one seed, so that's nice. The Seahawks get to have a week off here before they begin what they hope is a long playoff journey, getting back to the Super Bowl. Rob, you and I, with this little buffer period, it's perfect because it coincides with the voting for all pro teams in the National Football League. And I always get super giddy about this. I love to look at who the best and the best are in the NFL. And it feels like it's been a long time since we've had legitimately a number of Seahawks players that could be on this list. This year, with 14 wins, there's definitely several that are deserving, but there's a lot of really good football players in the National Football League. So without further ado, you and I are going to dive into our selections for this year's 2025 All-Pro first team. 11 offense, 11 defense, 5 on special teams. Let's start on the offensive side of the football. And I think you and I can be in agreement. There's a few positions that you and I are going to, I'm sure, have some differences in opinion. But I think one position that was really easy for me this year was the quarterback spot. My MVP, Matthew Stafford, has 12 more touchdown passes than anybody else in the National Football League. To me, this is a slam dunk. Even if he didn't play great the last 2 games of the season, the season holistically, he was better than anybody.
He was, and that's ultimately why I went with Matthew Stafford as well. I strongly consider Drake May. I just think that the turnaround that they had in Foxborough deserves some credit, and so I watched a lot of tape of Drake May, not only during his time at North Carolina, but of course what he did here with the New England Patriots this season. But as you said, Corbin, I mean he leads in passing yards, he leads in touchdowns, and by a significant margin in both. And so I do think that Matthew Stafford deserves to be the all-pro selection at the quarterback position.
As for the running back spot, this was kind of fascinating because I had 4 guys that I considered for first team, and there's 2 spots. And no, there's not going to be a Ken Walker or Zach Charbonnet here. Both those guys have had good seasons. They haven't been all-pro worthy with them sharing and splitting time in the backfield. But I cannot bypass Derrick Henry for this. I mean, Derrick Henry is 32 years old, going on 33, and he's still an absolute stud. Well over 1,200 rushing yards, double-digit rushing touchdowns. The Ravens were missing Lamar Jackson for an extensive chunk of the season, and teams were putting 8 guys in the box, and they still couldn't stop him. And so Derrick Henry, to me, Derrick Henry is a slam dunk. And Jonathan Taylor, think about all the injuries the Colts had, and his numbers took a little bit of a dip the last 5 or 6 weeks just because of the circumstances there at quarterback. But Jonathan Taylor was an absolute workhorse this year. I believe finished with the league lead in rushing yards as well. So actually James Cook passed him. But I thought Jonathan Taylor did the most with the least amount to work with for a good chunk of this season. So for me, James Cook, Bijan Robinson were 2 others that I considered here. But Jonathan Taylor, I felt, really put the Colts on his back. And this was a team that looked like they were going to be in the postseason before, unfortunately, they had an array of injuries that really took them out of the running late. He, though, was fantastic all year long.
Oh, no question about it. I mean, Derrick Henry is an unbelievable player. Future first ballot Hall of Famer. Jonathan Taylor, I thought, was, however, the most consistent running back all season long. Regardless of who was playing at the quarterback position, he was the guy that opponents had to basically prepare for. I mean, he winds up the season, even with Daniel Jones going down with the injury, 3rd in rushing yards, leads the NFL in touchdowns, 18 touchdowns in, of course, 17 actual games, but 18 touchdowns in 18 weeks. He led the NFL in rushing yards, had 1 fumble all season long. I mean, that is remarkable. So to me, Jonathan Taylor was kind of like just a given. He was kind of like Matthew Stafford at that point. And while I acknowledge Derrick Henry, I actually went with the young superstar, that being Bijan Robinson. I mean, he led the league in all-purpose yards, 2,298 all-purpose yards. I think that, maybe it's cherry picking a little bit. He certainly played at his absolute best in some key matchups, including late in the season. But at the same time, I just see the future when I look at Bijan Robinson. And so to me, I went with Jonathan Taylor. I strongly consider Christian McCaffrey, a player that you didn't mention a moment ago, just because of his dual threat abilities. But at the same time, when it's all said and done, I went with Jonathan Taylor, the Colts, and again, Bijan Robinson, the Atlanta Falcons, is my 2 choices for all-pro in the NFL this year.
Yeah, I think my big thing with McCaffrey was just the yards per carry not being where some of these other guys were at. I know that's not all on him. The pass catching is a big thing. Robinson, though, was certainly on the doorstep of making it for me. As far as other easy selections for me on my all-pro team, Jackson Smith and Jigba Puka Nacua, they were number 1 and 2 all year long. That is a slam dunk, putting those two in as the receivers. Trey McBride, the only tight end with over 1,000 receiving yards. And on that dumpster fire that was Arizona, he was spectacular this year. He's the best tight end in football. So those three, I had no difficulty with writing in their names in as the all-pro selections. And then the offensive line, there were maybe 4 or 5 other players I considered for these 5 spots, but Swell for the Lions is just fantastic. Even with them not making the playoffs, had a really good year. Garrett Bowles is a big reason the Denver Broncos are the number 1 seed in the AFC. He's one of the best all-around offensive linemen in the league, and he has been for a long time. Joe Thuney goes to the Bears. Bears become a playoff team. Like, the dude just doesn't miss the playoffs. He is one of those linchpins. And how about former Seahawk Damian Lewis? I think Carolina, the playoff-bound Panthers, I know they were 8-9, but they won their division. Damian Lewis had a fantastic year, and he was a big reason that Rico Dowdle hit 1,000-plus rushing yards for the first time. And, oh, by the way, Damian Lewis is near the top of the league among guards in fewest sacks, fewest pressures given up, and pass blocking efficiency rate. He's on a line that's got a few missing pieces there. I thought he was their most important player on the offensive side of the ball. And then Creed Humphrey, he's a slam dunk to me. He's head and shoulders above every other center in the NFL. Even with the Chiefs laying an egg this year, the injuries they had, Creed Humphrey was still the elite center that he has always been since they drafted him out of Oklahoma.
That's very true. At least the last part there where you said Creed Humphrey. But if you are one of those Locked On Seahawks fans that likes it when Corbin and I argue, then buckle up, because I am going to agree with him on some of the skill position players. When we get to the offensive line, there are some significant differences here. Now, first off with the wide receivers, I 100% agree with you. JSN leading the NFL with 1,993 passing yards receiving yards this season. 10 touchdowns. I mean, he was just everything that the Seahawks could possibly hope for. To me, he is a slam dunk as all pro. Puka Nacua, of course, Los Angeles Rams. He actually led the NFL with 129 catches. He was second only to JSN with 1,715 yards receiving. To me, he is equally a slam dunk as the number 2 guy as far as all pros, the wide receiver. Trey McBride, I struggled with a little bit more, actually, surprisingly, because Dallas Goedert of the Philadelphia Eagles, who was a very successful team as well, actually tied him for the most receptions as far as touchdowns this season for a tight end. But my goodness, Trey McBride, second in the NFL in receptions. Second in the NFL in receptions. I'm going to say it again. Second in the NFL in receptions as a tight end. I mean, my goodness, it just hasn't been, that's basically never happened before. So again, Trey McBride is a slam dunk, but at the same time, I have to tip the cap to Dallas Goedert, the Philadelphia Eagles. 11 touchdown receptions to the tight end position is just rare. I agree with you with Garrett Bowles. I actually went with Trent Williams. I just think that the drop-off between Trent Williams and Austin Pleasance at the left tackle position for the San Francisco 49ers just further acknowledges that Trent Williams is one of the true legends of the game. To me, Quentin Nelson remains the standard at the guard position at the Indianapolis Colts. One of the biggest reasons why, that Jonathan Taylor had the success that he had. I actually thought that the right guard, Jonah Jackson, in my opinion, actually was more effective than Joe Thuney at the guard position. Really watching the tape, but regardless, we're talking about 2 of the best guards in all of the business, whether it be Joe Thuney, whether it be Jonah Jackson with the Chicago Bears, both very, very effective. A huge reason why Chicago had the success they had. And look, I love Creed Humphrey. He is the selection I made as well. But my goodness, I think you have to acknowledge Austin Brewer, the Miami Dolphins. I had a hard time making him my choice considering how much Miami struggled. But you want to watch a wide zone blocking center get out and move. Look, with all due respect to Jalen Sundell and as athletic as he showed himself to be, my goodness, Austin Brewer definitely can do that. Tyler Linderbaum as well, but kind of tailed off towards the end of the season against big bodies. So, again, I think that there are some very talented offensive linemen out there that deserve all-pro consideration, even though their NFL teams weren't quite as successful in the win-loss column as some of the other ones.
When we come back, we've got plenty to debate on the defensive side of the football. I think you and I probably had more differences on defense. And so I'm looking forward to diving into our all-pro teams on that side of the football. That's coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. The wild card round is here, and FanDuel is officially in playoff mode. Every game day during the NFL playoffs, FanDuel is giving customers even more ways to get into the action because right now, every NFL playoff game day, FanDuel users get a profit boost pack waiting for them inside the app. Each game day, you'll see a pack loaded with multiple profit boosts you can apply to the bets you like most. Open your profit boost back first thing on game day and see what boosts you want to apply. The boosts give you more juice on the bets you already like instead of forcing you to bet on something new. Every play feels bigger, and the boosts make your bets feel that way too. You make your picks, then apply your profit boost to go after even bigger payouts while the playoffs get rolling. So visit FanDuel, an official sportsbook partner of the NFL, and grab your profit boost pack every NFL playoff game day. Welcome back, Tuesday edition, Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith, my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. A special thanks to all the 12s who are tuning in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Time to dig into our all-pro rosters. Now that the regular season is over with, the Seahawks are on a bye. It's a perfect time to look at the best of the best. We just talked offense. Now, swinging over to the defensive side of the football, and I will admit, I really didn't have any Seahawks that I considered an offense for the first team All-Pro except Jackson Smith and Jigba, and that's not taking slights at a number of their players. I just didn't think there was anybody that was at the best of the best at any of their position groups that, maybe if we're talking second team All-Pro, there might have been a couple guys that were worth discussion, but that is not the case on the defensive side of the football. And I know in particular, it's one of these really weird situations where you and I both think the Seahawks should have a defensive tackle on first team All-Pro, but the question is who? And that's the luxury that the Seahawks have in the trenches defensively right now.
It is. And that's why I actually went with Byron Murphy second. I just thought that his ability to kind of play, just be a stump in the middle of Seattle's run defense. I thought that he played a remarkable role in Seattle's number one ranked defense this year. And so, look, I certainly acknowledge Leonard Williams. He's my favorite player in all of the NFL, regardless of position to watch. So I am certainly not going to argue against Leonard Williams. I just think that Byron Murphy he's got next. Used to be an old Nike commercial. I think that Byron Murphy's got next. And I think that enough people around the NFL and the voters are going to acknowledge the impact that he has had for the Seahawks this year.
Yeah, you make some really good points, and I certainly considered it. It felt like almost a coin toss to me, and I don't like using that verbiage because it makes it seem like it's like, well, one way or the other, but that's kind of how it has felt, When you look at Byron Murphy versus Leonard Williams, they both had the same number of sacks. They were very close in the pressures category. QB hits, Leonard Williams had a few more in that regard. Run defense, I would argue Byron Murphy has been almost more consistent, and that's not a shot at Big Cat. They've both been great. Just Byron Murphy, just every game makes plays that just make your jaw drop against the run with his ability to take on double teams. I looked at the pass rushing production, and Leonard Williams still is the better football player right now. And so that's why I rolled with Leonard Williams as my selection up front for the Seahawks rather than Byron Murphy. But I can't argue against the other one. So I'm really excited about that. But you look at the defensive line, Myles Garrett just set a record for the number of sacks in a season. He's my defensive player of the year. Jeffrey Simmons had 11 sacks for the Titans. I got Cortez Kennedy, 1992. Seahawks vibes with him doing that in Tennessee. So he has to be the number one DT with Leonard Williams next to him. And then I went with Aiden Hutchinson of the Lions, had another really good season coming back from that nasty leg injury that he had the year before. Even with the Lions as a team underachieving, Hutchinson's ability to defend both the run and the pass, the pressure numbers, the sack numbers, to me, I felt like, it's a distant second behind Myles Garrett, but that's not really anything to scoff at. Myles Garrett had a historically dominant season. So that's my defensive line in a nutshell.
Yeah, and similar to the conversation we had the guard position before. I mean, you picked the one Chicago guard, I picked the other. Same thing here with the Seahawks as far as defensive tackles, and that, in a nutshell, is the biggest reason, or at least among the reasons, why the Seahawks are sitting pretty in number one seed in the NFC, is because they do have these two dominant defensive tackles, and they're so versatile. They're so different. I just love that aspect from a Seahawk perspective. I actually, other than the two Seahawks defensive tackles, the only other difference that we had along the defensive line is you went with Aiden Hutchinson, which I can't argue. Again, Aiden Hutchinson is one of my favorite players in all of the league, but I actually went with Will Anderson for the Houston Texans. I love his physicality, the pass rush, and certainly Danielle Hunter on the opposite side for the Houston Texans also is a candidate I considered. But I just think that Will Anderson plays the game with physicality against the run and is enough burst and just recognition in the passing game that he deserved this acknowledgement. But again, this is the NFL scout in me that is always looking for who's got next. Will Anderson is one of the best young players in all of the NFL, regardless of position.
And I think when you look at all pro teams, one of the things that's always, I'm not going to say it's complex or complicated, but teams run different types of schemes. And when it comes to defensive ends versus outside linebackers, Brian Burns, for example, I have Brian Burns down as a defensive end. When I look at how New York uses him, when he was with Carolina, I might have said outside linebacker with him. So I think there's some subjectivity to that when you're looking at all pro teams. But there's two outside linebackers and an inside linebacker. And to me, in today's NFL, the outside linebackers have to be guys that can turn up the heat and pass rush. Like, they have to be guys that contribute in that perspective. That's just the way the NFL is now. Maybe you want to have two inside linebackers and slide one of them as an outside linebacker. I didn't see anybody, though, that justified that for me this year. So for my outside linebackers, I went with Nick Bonito with the Broncos. And another reason Denver's in the number one spot, that guy is a quarterback nightmare, getting after players, can drop back in coverage. And Micah Parsons, before his ACL tear, was having a phenomenal season in Green Bay. Totally worth the trade that they made with the Cowboys before that ACL tear. So I've got Bonito and Parsons. And then I've got Ernest Jones at inside linebacker. He led the league. He was tied with Devin Lloyd of the Jaguars for the most interceptions off ball linebackers. He had better run defense numbers than what Devin Lloyd did. And I just felt like Ernest Jones was the most complete inside linebacker in the NFL this year. I considered Jordan Brooks, former Seahawk, for that spot in Miami, had more tackles. But I felt like Ernest Jones, when you look at the entire workload, was the best inside linebacker in the league.
I have a hard time arguing that point. I went with Brian Burns as far as the edge rushers, as far as the outside linebacker. I just had to kind of squeeze a guy in that finished second in the NFL, 16 and a half sacks. Look, we talked about Myles Garrett before. I mean, he's unquestionably the defensive player of the year. I think it's an easier slam dunk for a guy that breaks the record for the most sacks in a season to be defensive player of the year than it is for Matthew Stafford as the offensive player of the year or the MVP this season. So I certainly have to acknowledge Brian Burns. I mean, 16 and a half sacks, as I mentioned before. He had 5 games where he had 2+ sacks. He had 3 forced fumbles. He had 7 passes defense. So he's not just a pass rusher. He gets his hands up and creates turnover opportunities as well. I just thought that Brian Burns deserved to be acknowledged in this. Now, it's difficult to argue for any member of the New York Giants to be an all-pro, but I thought that Brian Burns played at that type of a level this year. And you mentioned Jordan Brooks. And look, I just think that at the linebacker position, with all due respect to Ernest Jones, and I certainly understand that argument. I think that what he brought to the Seahawks 2 years ago when they made the trade, and then certainly this year, the 5 interceptions this season, he was unbelievable. But Jordan Brooks led the NFL in tackles. He led the NFL in solo tackles. So if I'm going to make the argument a moment ago about Brian Burns being on a putrid team and still putting up unbelievable numbers, then damn it, you got to make the same kind of argument for Jordan Brooks. So look, I'm rooting for Ernest Jones to get that acknowledgement, but that's why I made the selection of Jordan Brooks at the inside linebacker position.
Now let's swing to the secondary. And I will admit, I had kind of a hard time with the cornerback spot because it's similar for, we mentioned with the Seahawks with Leonard Williams and Byron Murphy, which one do we pick? Do you put both of them on first team? Like that's unheard of. Well, I think you could make an argument at cornerback that Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean for the Eagles, those two guys have been outstanding this year. But there's a few other guys that are deserving at that spot. And when I considered those two, as much as I love Cooper DeJean and everybody who listens to Locked On Seahawks, I was demanding the Seahawks draft him a couple of years ago when he was coming out of Iowa. I think he's had a really, really good start to his NFL career. Quinyon Mitchell has been a no-flight zone. No touchdowns given up. I don't care if the interception numbers aren't there. He's got pass breakups. He has been so difficult for quarterbacks to throw against. And a lot of times quarterbacks just don't even test him. He has reached that point in Philadelphia's secondary in his second year. So Quinyon Mitchell is my first selection that I've got at the cornerback spot. And across from Derek Stingley Jr., I know he's given up a few touchdowns. Jackson Smith and Jigba, though, was really the one culprit for all of that. You take that game out, he's been utterly dominant for that Texans defense that was number one in scoring up until the last game of the season. They sat a lot of their veterans. Stingley has been stingy on the back end. So I've got those two. And then at safety, I've got another Texans player. Kalen Bullock's having a dang good year at the safety position. I have him as my free safety. And Nick Emanwari, I know some of our fans are going to say, well, he's putting on his blue Seahawks glasses today. Look, he leads all safeties in pass breakups. He's got 8 of them. He is among the top 3 safeties in the league with 2.5 sacks. He is tied for second in tackles for loss among safeties. And he did that while missing 4 games with a high ankle sprain. And then he added the interception and all the other things he does playing like 7 positions. Ernest Jones talked about how difficult prepping for game week is for him because of all the responsibilities he has. Look, there is not a guy in the NFL that can match that this year at the safety position. I think Nick Emanwari, to me, that was an easy selection with everything that he has done and just how much better this defense has been with him coming into the lineup. So Emanwari and Bullock are my safeties.
Oh, I think you make a strong argument for it. I went with different names, the safety position, but the argument that you just made for Nick Emanwari, having watched every play of every game for the Seahawks, I struggle to argue with the points that you made for Nick Emanwari specifically. I actually went with the exact same cornerbacks that you went with. Derek Stingley, in the Houston Texans, Quinyon Mitchell with the Philadelphia Eagles. The Eagles, to your point about Cooper DeJean, I mean, the Eagles gave up the least touchdown passes all season long. And you consider some of the passing attacks in that division and who the Super Bowl champions faced all season long. That's a hell of an accomplishment. I would not be surprised at all if when it's all said and done, Quinyon Mitchell and Cooper DeJean, wind up getting the both all-pro selections at the cornerback position. Switching over to safety, I just love the versatility that we've seen from Nick Emanwari, but also think that I just don't know that a lot of NFL voters actually watched as many of the Seahawks games as you and I did, sir. So I actually went with 2 other superstars that I think that you can lump Nick Emanwari into the conversations with Kyle Hamilton of the Baltimore Ravens. Obviously, Mike Macdonald is very familiar with them. And a player that I think that Nick Emanwari actually reminds me of a little bit. I've been fortunate enough to go to Los Angeles Chargers training camp the last couple of seasons. And Derwin James, to me, also offers a lot of that same type of versatility. And I just have to acknowledge the impact, just the success that the Los Angeles Chargers have had on the defensive side of the ball with moving Derwin James down to the line of scrimmage as well as playing back. I just think we were talking about some of the bright young safeties in all of the NFL, in James, in Hamilton, in Emanwari, Kalen Bullock, to your point as well. To me, again, I went with Derwin James and Kyle Hamilton, but I certainly understand the push for Nicky Manwari. I don't know that he's going to get all pro, but he damn well better get Defensive Rookie of the Year.
And there you got it. We're going to end the show on that note because that is the kind of exclamation point that we need here. He better damn well be Defensive Rookie of the Year. I voted for him, so we'll just leave it at that. So anyway, as always, you can follow me at X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, you win 14 games, you get a bye. Teams are going to be sniffing around looking at your assistants for head coaching jobs. We're going to dive into Adam Durde and Clint Kubiak's growing list of interview requests and what that means for the Seahawks heading towards their playoff game in the divisional round at Lumen Field. Make sure you listen in and enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.